I dropped a whole 147-page contract document in.
The Applied AI Podcast, where tech meets ROI.
Mind blown.
Welcome back to the Applied AI Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Andra, CEO of Talbot West. And today's episode is coming to you from inside Talbot West. I'm interviewing Steve Larsen, our managing director. Steve, why don't you introduce yourself and tell our listeners just a little bit about your background?
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. So my background is a 30-year work in the fields of pharmaceuticals, healthcare, from big data to SaaS to consulting, with roles from individual contributor to vice VP of sales. And really, it's given me the opportunity to be sort of a chameleon. And it's been a great opportunity to bring those skills inside of Talbot West.
Today's episode focuses on the role of AI in Revops. Obviously, a very core interest to most companies. Anytime you can increase top line revenue, that's a good thing, which is why we have the proliferation of software tools out there for different types of RevOps functions. The current SaaS model is broken. It's based on a point solution per function, which leads to a lot of tech sprawl. So tech sprawl is one of the biggest challenges with the current paradigm. But the second big challenge, which is equally important, is that these tools are not calibrated to a single company's internal logic and the hundreds of variables that make up how they sell, how they differentiate at a given point in time, which is also changing over time. By the way, this overall critique is not specific to RevOps. It's company-wide across any domain of functionality, but we're here to talk about how that applies to RevOps specifically today. How do you see this playing out, Steve? And you've had a lot of experience in companies and you've used a lot of these tools. Kind of broadly speaking, what's been some of your experience?
Yeah, I think I just think about the trainings that I've gone through. Let's start in the late 90s, going back to Sanofi, a pharmaceutical company that was not even on the map. And it was my entry point into the pharmaceutical world. And the tools that are commonly used, and it's interesting because they really haven't changed a lot over time up until recently. Everyone is using Salesforce. That's a need. We're using ZoomInfo and tools like Sales Navigator. And today, a lot of those same tools are at the core of where teams are going. But what gets lost in the shuffle with these point tools is, ironically, the end customer and their needs and what they need to hear from you in order to trust you, like you, work with you. And unfortunately, if you look at, for example, a BDR team, the competency that they're really been trained to be effective in is outreach. A point tool that is a phenomenal tool, does a great job of getting to a lot of people in a very short amount of time. But what it misses is that internal logic you mentioned, Jacob, and the proprietary, maybe the value proposition that is most tailored to the individual client. And so what gets lost is the incentivization of these BDR teams and even at mid-market enterprise account executives, where they are tasked to set meetings, to approach these customers. But unfortunately, because of the tool sprawl, and because of how they're incentivized, sometimes what gets lost in the mix is the personalization and the trust that needs to be gained almost immediately. And in today's really TikTok world of really first impressions and the first 10 to 15 seconds of gaining your end prospect's attention, a lot of that gets lost. And unfortunately, it is because of the tech sprawl, and companies and organizations focus on making that individual an expert in a tool versus a process that is tailored to the end client.
Everything you've said is so true and so good. It's what we're seeing with all of our clients as well. They all want to know how to improve RevOps. You know, all these reports have come out recently. We just released our own state of the market field report on RevOps AI tools. But what these reports are saying is that RevOps teams, sales reps have more tools at their disposal than any time before in history, and yet they're still performing poorly, maybe even more poorly. Their performance may even be dropping a bit. And this is crazy, but true. And so the punchline, I mean, where we're driving with all this is that it's very easy now with AI capabilities for teams in-house or in collaboration with a trusted expert partner to build very configured capabilities that don't have to cost a lot. And this is breaking an old dichotomy between oh, do I buy something cheap out of the box, or do I spend a bunch of money on custom software development? Well, we're talking about custom configuration. A lot of times you don't have to have any software development at all. You can configure existing capabilities, tools, and platforms with your own internal proprietary logic and rubrics, and you can do it in a sort of compounding way. You can actually start wiring these together where they learn from each other, talk to each other. You can build one intelligent core that spawns multiple different functions, and so on and so forth. So this is solving both the problem of sprawl and the problem of genericness that doesn't speak to your company's specifics and all the hundreds of variables that go into how you sell.
And you know what's interesting, Jacob, as you talk, is I think about the average application count within enterprise is 12 to 15 tools, point solutions. And I remember being with a digital adoption platform or DAP organization that pioneered to solve for this problem. And it is that today's employees are overwhelmed with the amount of tools that they have. And to the extent that they need what is a Sherpa inside the tool to avoid tickets and phoning a friend and figuring out how to run a report and how all these tools all work together. And it's really an exclamation point of the things that you're sharing now. And what we're doing with Talbot West is quite the opposite. We don't need a platform to teach us how to focus in on our targeting or the messaging that we need by customer. It's really within a simplified tool, but it has a high degree of rubric, context, and engineering that has been a low cost, but super effective. That's honestly, for me, made my job a lot easier. And I feel a whole lot more confident going into sales calls in my pre-call planning preparation as a result.
Yeah, and you just mentioned pre-call planning. That is a core function that, SaaS products on the market are trying to address. You have tools like Gong that are focused heavily on the post-mortem. All of these tools are trying to enter this space. And again, they're doing it with these major deficiencies that are really hard for any SaaS vendor to solve, because no SaaS vendor can really anticipate the needs of any individual company to the level of granularity that will make it as effective as something configured in-house. But let's walk through some of the different functions across the Revops infrastructure. Pre-call planning is a great one. I'd love you to speak to that. Obviously, we use that heavily inside of Talbot West. Coaching, just coaching a sales rep up. I mean, you can now configure these. And again, I want to point to the value of the compounding effects. If you build a tool for pre-call planning or configure a capability, you can easily now apply that to coaching a new sales rep, independent of any specific call, on your company's processes and rubrics. And it's the same harness. And let me just pause on this word harness. It's the configured logic, guardrails, tools, and systems you wrap around an AI model or a set of AI models that make it perform in very specific ways to your company. So we're going to be using this term harness a bit in this podcast, and these harnesses can be configured extremely specifically. So you build one harness that does pre-call planning. It doesn't take that much more effort to now extend that into new rep ramp up, call post-mortem analysis and performance improvement, and even things like compensation management and compensation plan structuring and master executive strategy and competitor analysis, and a dozen or 24 other distinct areas that the exact same harness with a little bit of extending and a little bit of additional structure can do all of that. And now you don't have sprawl and you have extreme customization.
Yeah. And that extreme customization, Jacob, is really what I think sets up this whole theme, which is making your internal structure match the environment and the value prop and the customer base and the addressable market that you're going after. As I think about time in other organizations, and pre-call planning is at the heart of really what makes everything go. And you think about the tools that are available today, they are, to your point, Jacob, they are not tailored, they are not customized to provide the kind of direction that what a harness will provide, because there are, at any given time, whether you're in pharmaceuticals or you're in capital equipment or you're in SaaS technology, you're running multiple parallel deals to hit your quota. And because of the quota attainment that is so focused on in leadership, you look at companies like Microsoft right now that are heavily invested in AI tooling. But the irony is that that same investment is coming back to bite them. And you can read it in the papers, because that is now a paradox that Satya Nadella and others are trying to overcome because they don't have this type of harness and the type of contextualization. And so what I'm getting at is coaching inside organizations today is largely dependent on tools like Gong and tools like Chorus. And what managers are really focusing on is talk time and how much they're listening instead of how impactful is the messaging in terms of meeting needs and internal objectives that make the client ultimately successful. And one of the greatest lessons that I learned at McKesson selling capital equipment was being focused, other focused. And harnessing allows you to do that in a way that point solution tools just don't. And so I think that's the most exciting part of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and to the compounding capability of the harness, you can start it with focusing on just a single function and get that really dialed in before extending it. And you can invest in it and expand it over time in a very compounding way. It's amazing that way. And I think our listeners are probably wondering, like, great, a harness, where does it live? Like, what is it actually? And the harness itself, or the idea of a harness, is independent of platform and technology. That's what's interesting about it. But to get specific and to give our listeners at least some kind of specifics, you can start with something as simple as a highly configured Claude environment. And I say Claude, not ChatGPT, not any of these other tools, because Claude now allows the largest amount of context and the most granular types of internal configuration. Whereas ChatGPT obviously allows you to build your custom GPTs, which are great. Claude now not only allows you to build projects, which is the analog to a GPT, and the projects hold way more context than a GPT, but they now have skills and a lot of other functions that allow for the types of harnessing we're talking about. I mean, so a great stepping stone might be a team or enterprise Claude environment that all your reps have access to, where you start building out this internal logic in very specific ways. Again, initially, it could just be around pre-call planning, and then you might extend it to other things. Later, you might choose to migrate off Claude into some other platform or a series of platforms wired together. This doesn't all have to live in a single platform now. With tool calls, APIs, and connectors and things like that, you can actually have your harness span multiple ecosystems if it's engineered correctly, and often at very low cost, because a lot of times these ecosystems or platforms can be incredibly cheap, like very commodity infrastructure that has custom configuration built in. And then to extend that, eventually, you're probably going to want to wire it into a lot of your core systems. So if you're married to Salesforce and you're not likely to get off it anytime soon, you may want your harness to be making data pulls directly from Salesforce, directly from your ERP, directly from other systems. And so that would be a tiered escalation of complexity. You could start with something like a configured Claude environment, potentially graduate to something like a multi-environment configuration with tool calls and different platforms performing different functions within the harness. And then eventually you might even choose to go the full custom software route if you want to own something that your entire company has a single interface. It's all seamless. It's branded the way you want it, looks the way you want it, and is fully integrated to all your systems. That would be the ultimate expression of it. But again, this graduation of complexity and of cost. So you have a lot of options available to you.
Right. Yeah. And that just reminds me of the Wall Street Journal article that I shared over the weekend, Jacob, with AI being reduced in there's a cost containment strategy out in the business world where teams are starting to figure out that tokenization and spend are starting to escalate. And even internal teams are being told not to use AI as much because of the tokenization and increased costs. So lower cost models are now becoming more in play. But the one thing that is I think interesting is the strategy that without the right experience and expertise, leveraging these lower cost tools and knowing how to architect them in an environment.
Yeah, we certainly focus on cost containment. And when you're talking about managing costs, you're actually talking two orthogonal axes of cost management. One is the cost of the platform or subscription itself. So, for example, Claude Team is somewhere upward of $20 a seat per month. And so let's say you're orchestrating some kind of harness across multiple platforms. What's the raw subscription cost to each platform? And some of these platforms have the token costs already baked into them, which leads us to now our second axis of cost management, which is the tokenization itself. How many tokens are you burning with an AI call, and what is that costing you? So again, on Claude, you're paying for the platform. Token costs are already baked in unless you hit your limit and you want to pay for more. It goes on a 5-hour rolling window, so on and so forth. There are other types of platforms or setups where if you're making raw API calls like to Anthropic, for example, for the Claude models, you might be being billed directly for those token calls and those token uses. And so this comes when you're talking about managing the cost of token use itself. The different AI models are of different levels of sophistication and complexity, and the really good advanced models burn way more tokens when you use them, and the less sophisticated models burn fewer tokens when you use them. And so which is the right model for what type of use? And so you can segregate that out, and you can say, okay, when we're doing this type of function or this type of query, we're going to use the lower model. We're going to burn fewer tokens. When we're doing this much more sophisticated, advanced reasoning type query, it's worth burning more tokens for this more advanced model. And all of that can be mapped and architected out.
100%. Yeah, and it just makes me think of, since I started with Talbot West, Jacob, it's been interesting to be in different conversations and bring in my sales experience across different verticals into the present time. And the metaphor of the iceberg comes to mind. And it seems as though as we're looking at point solutions and how no single tool is going to be able to really dial in your effectiveness as an organization, it seems that most organizations, or a lot anyway, are playing above the water surface where large language models like ChatGPT and Claude live. And then you look at recording devices and tools such as Plod and Otter and even Zoom Info, and all of these have their own islands of efficiency type AI functionality. And the perception is that these organizations have adopted AI. But in reality, below the surface is really where the magic happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a mental model called islands of efficiency or islands of intelligence that you alluded to. And the common misperception companies have is, hey, I'm subscribed to 7 or 12 different tools and they all have AI in them. Therefore, we can check off this box called AI, say we're doing it, even though it's not really moving the needle for us. The fact that AI is embedded in all of these separate tools is actually causing very little value because there's no central configuration of AI architecture, reasoning architecture for our company as a whole. None of these individual AI capabilities that live in their little islands are actually configured for us the way that we work and our goals. And so the answer isn't always throw all those tools out. It's to do an assessment. Some of those tools you may want to keep. You may not want to reinvent a Plod device or a Fathom type functionality. You may just want to grab that, plug it right into your system. And so the answer isn't always throw out all the point solutions, build everything from scratch. It's to thoughtfully say, how do we own our own AI architecture, our own reasoning? And the answer is almost always going to be some form of a harness that then is the central hub. And then you figure out on a case-by-case basis what to plug in that's already built, what to configure, what to wrap. You can wrap your own reasoning around other people's tools. There are a lot of different ways to do it, and it really is a case-by-case basis.
100%, yeah. And the word that you brought out earlier, Jacob, that I really have gravitated towards is the compounding effect. And the right compounding effect with the right tools and solutioning is really important as we think about new hire onboarding. Churn is a real thing. Time to value for your sales teams, and whether you're in sales or marketing or wherever, having a compounding effect, meaning that harness or that intellectual property is all scaffolded and it only grows and becomes more valuable over time, so that when attrition happens and you lose people, that compounding benefit ends up being a benefit for those newcomers, that new blood in the organization, to ultimately achieve more faster. And that's kind of the world we live in.
It's the amount of effort required to spin up new functions goes down as a kind of inverse rule to the amount of functions you're creating, because the overall harness, the amount of context and understanding you've built about your company is easily extensible into the new functions.
100%.
Yeah. Well, hey, it's been great having you on. I'm excited for what we're doing here. Let's keep up the good work.
Will do. Thanks for having me, Jacob.
Yeah, you bet.